All righty, we are here again for another special RCR Council Watch video. And if you're coming on in, come on in. So good to see you. And look, you'll be so thrilled that it's not just Maree this time round. I've already got Kathryn here in the hot seat. We're going to get started in a moment. So, those that don't know me, my name is Maree Buscke. I've been with RCR since the beginning. Well, actually, I started 1 week after, actually, to be fair. 3 years. We've just had our third birthday. Where has that gone? I have returned to broadcasting after a huge big hiatus. I got sucked in by the team. I have run a couple of medical businesses along with my husband. I also still have an interest in a yarn-based business, which is what I was doing as a day job for the first 2 years with RCR. But I've now been doing this full-time year 3 and heading into year 4 and loving every moment. And of course, if you've not met the wonderful Kathryn Ennis-Carter before, Kathryn is a consultant, an advisory specialising in governance, public management, public financial management, public sector reform, policy development, and essentially she is a governance guru to end all governance gurus in a great number of places. We were just talking about educational governance, were we not, before we got started. So, Kathryn, welcome along. And yeah, that feedback was brilliant. It's given us a really good roadmap, I think, for the rest of the year with Council Watch. Did you feel that as well?
Oh, absolutely. And I'm just going to highlight some things from the chat and also from the additional questions that we received and the homework that came in. So, and I was really delighted with this. So I highlighted the recurring themes across councils that you identified, and this is from the chat, what all you guys sent in. So there's 6 points here. Hazard mapping affecting insurance and property values, rising rates and infrastructure costs, reduced public participation in council decisions, lack of transparency and accountability, heavy reliance on modelling for planning decisions, and increasing bureaucratic control over elected councillors. Now, if I was to put a list together of some of the key things that are going on that we are seeing all over the place, that would be my list. I mean, you guys are just, that's why I say I was thrilled, but you
Mm.
guys are just onto it. So I'm going to
Yeah.
go through some of I'm not going to go through all the chat points or questions that we had. But I just want to pick up a few of the questions and just answer briefly what I can at the moment, because some of these things are going to come up later on as we do further webinars. So, under council structures, governance, and democracy as a general heading, somebody said, why are there so many public excluded meetings? And the answer to that is, well, because they can. And I mean, the only actual real reason for doing that is commercial sensitivity. So when they're talking about contracts and figures and particularly things that are, not yet approved or agreed, that's a reason. But what we're finding is that a lot of councillors are fabricating reasons to exclude the public. And a key example is the annual plan meetings that have been taking place. So your council's been having a lot of meetings. They're obliged to do some public briefing meetings, but these are where the public are just an observer. So you can go along to these meetings, but most of the meetings that they've had on developing the annual plan and on other things are public excluded just because they want to do that. So they want to be able to discuss things without the public there, so that they can get the decisions in place when the public then are invited to make comment. So, and then somebody else says, is the local government in New Zealand a problem? Yes. Mainly because
That's the underestimation of the evening, but yes.
yes, mainly because the local government New Zealand is supposed to be the representative body for council laws. They're supposed to provide advice, but they have become a conduit between central government and local government. So yes, they're part of the problem. Somebody said, do we still have unelected representatives with voting rights in councils? Yes. Mostly that's iwi, but also some councils are doing strange things like Tauranga has
Mm.
appointed youth to committees and given them voting rights. But remember also that now we're in a situation where through contracting out, we have so many arm's length organisations that are managing council assets or providing services. And so you've got lots of directors on trusts, you've got trustees for various trusts that council has appointed, you've got council-controlled organisations with directors. So all these people are virtually non-elected appointees. And so in addition to the ones that are directly appointed to sit on council committees and have voting rights, there's all those people as well. Somebody said, are council funds used not for the purposes meant? Yes. And we've seen some examples of this with the money that was given to councils for Three Waters. And for some councils, it's gone elsewhere. And then somebody asked, and these are quite important questions about understanding councils. Who is behind local government governance structures? Well, the overall structure of local government with the number of regional councils and whatever is all decided by Parliament, by legislation. But every council is actually free to decide its own management structure. And it's also free to decide the number of elected councillor committees that they have and what those committees are and who are on them. Then somebody said, is it district councils or regional councils that are causing the man-made problems that we're seeing with some of the weather events? The answer to that is both, and it relates to different functions. So, for example, city and district councils have the responsibility for looking after the stormwater systems and for clearing drains. So, in my area, there were floods a few years ago in local, in low-lying areas, and one of the contributing factors was the council not doing its responsibility and maintaining the drains properly. But then you get other situations where regional councils, one of the things that they have to do is they're responsible for river management. So, for example, where river, what do you call it? Like the estuary areas and
Oh, catchment areas.
catchment areas, but that's the overall catchment. What I mean is at the river mouth, where areas that are supposed to be dredged haven't been done so. And so then you get silt building up and all sorts of things which contributes to flooding and blockages and what have you.
And I think we mentioned last time why that was a huge issue in my area in Wairoa, north of me,
Yes.
and to the point where a large insurer took the Hawke's Bay Regional Council to court over it, and they settled because of man-made issues, which exacerbated flooding both during Gabrielle and post Gabrielle, and also the Napier City Council was scolded as well because of poor maintenance issues that is exacerbated flooding at the end of 2020 within Napier City. So, here we go, two council entities, both in the same area, both creating issues.
Yeah. And somebody on the chat is saying Westport is another prime example, and I think that's been featured in the media as well. So there was a lot of questions relating to hazard mapping and managed retreat. And I'm going to mention a few things, but we'll leave most of that until the next webinar because we're going to do a whole webinar on managed retreat and hazard mapping and flooding and all the stuff that's leading to that. And then somebody wrote in about the difficulty of analysing council documentation and information. She says, is there anyone who can help interpret council accounting and identify potential corruption? Um, well, yes, and that's mainly you.
Mm.
And it's difficult to do that. And this is why I've been saying, try and get a group around you and look for where you can get that kind of expertise. Because there are points, the documents are difficult to analyse. And I'm going to talk about that a bit more in relation to the annual plan and the annual report. But yes, I personally am working with somebody who has made three approaches to the Office of the Auditor General um, for what looks like fraud or financial mismanagement. He's yet to get them to take anything up. And so it can be really difficult to get anything done where you do identify corruption. But there are bodies like the Audit Office, and people have um, gathered up a fund, asked for donations. We have a couple of organisations, community organisations in Kapiti who have done that, and they've put funds together to have a judicial review of council activities, and they've won those cases. So it can happen. But if we don't have people like you, the community, monitoring what councils are doing, then this stuff gets missed.
Mm.
What
All
else?
right, let's move into our because I'm just looking at the time, Kathryn. Let's move on to our annual plans because that's what we're going to talk about today. So
Okay.
we've got a few things to cover off. We're going to be looking at the annual plan and the importance of them, the little secret where you can find the real information, how you can participate, which Kathryn just mentioned before, and pushback, and also what we're going to do in the next webinar. So thank you to everybody that sent in your homework. So as I said, it was a very simple thing to do in Napier. The plan was going to be released by the 30th of March with a feedback period, I think, in early June. I've also heard here from Krisha for Hastings, so up the road from me. She was saying the District Council there plan to consult on its draft annual plan submitted to Council for adoption 25th of March, which is tomorrow, and then that'll go out for submissions and hearings to be held the 10th and 11th of June. So I think that time frame, isn't it, Kathryn, is fairly standard right now. That's pretty much the window that we're looking at. I had another one for
Yes.
Auckland, I think was the 31st. This Gillian is saying here details are being to be consulted in the Auckland's annual plan were published in the Henderson Massey local board newsletter that she receives. So if you're on a local board newsletter, make sure you check those. That will obviously have Auckland stuff there. So the information is now out at the moment. So let me hand over to you and sort of let's work people through firstly why these annual plans are so important for everything that we do in terms of our interaction at council, and why and what people can do actually to get that information and actually start digesting some of it.
Yeah. So right about now, your council will be adopting its draft annual plan and budget for the 26-27 financial year. So the financial year starts from the 1st of July. So all councils have to formally adopt the annual plan before the end of June every year. And the reason it's so important is because the annual plan and the budget for each financial year is the basis on which they set the rate. So, if you're not taking notice of what some of the key expenditure issues are and what's in the annual plans, then, you're going to get your rates increase, whatever it is, coming as a surprise. So that's why the annual plan is important. And what we're seeing now is a trend where councils are all the time referring back to the long-term plan. So there's been a lot of confusion about what the long-term plan and what the annual plan is. So the long-term plan is supposed to be the indicative strategy and indicative budget for 10 years. but the council reviews it every 3 years because a lot of things change. So they will update the annual plan every 3 years. But every time they do it, it's for the subsequent next 10 years. Okay. So, but the annual plan is like, the first, second, third, whatever years of the long-term plan. However, the long-term plan is supposed to be indicative. The annual plan is the detailed budget on which your rates are actually decided. That's why it's important. Um, and there are a lot of problems developing now with the annual plan process. And one of them is whether councils consult or not on the annual plan. And that's what we asked you to look at as homework. And so we found from what people sent in that there are a number of councils that are choosing not to consult on the annual plan. And the reason that that's important is because the Act specifies that there's kind of an implicit intention in the Act that basically councils don't really have to consult on the first year of a long-term plan because the annual plan for that year will be basically the same as year one of the long-term plan. And it's kind of implicit in the wording of the Act that councils really should uh, consult with the community from year two onwards. But we're getting councils who are not doing that. And there is a clause in the Act where if the annual plan is the same as the long-term plan, and the wording of the Act is that there are no significant or material differences, then they don't have to consult on the annual plan. But things change a lot, and basically, when you've got like at least often with the second year, but the third year definitely, there are often enough changes that really get councils to the point where they're supposed to consult. Now, the mechanism that they use for justifying not consulting is that every council is supposed to develop a significance and engagement policy where they actually choose what is the definition of significant and material. And so they'll say, and a lot of these things are not actual reasons because it basically has to be the same in terms of the financial statements and the financial impact statements. So councils define their own criteria for what's significant difference. But what we're finding is that, and I've struck one council where they've actually overridden their own criteria, but they're still justifying a decision not to consult. Now, that to me is that's going against the intention of the Act. It's actually illegal in my view. And so, but they'll give people lots of obfuscation rationale for not consulting. Oh, well, we're not increasing the rate by, a significant difference from what we've put in the long-term plan. Oh, we're not changing service levels or, these other things, but they're not actually in compliance with the Act. So that's happening. The other thing that's happening is that councils only have to produce a consultation document to consult on the annual plan. So they don't have to consult specifically on the entire draft annual plan. So
But isn't the devil in the detail, Kathryn?
absolutely. And so you get these generic documents that are full of, very overview statements and rhetoric and so people, notice that it doesn't give them the detail that they're looking for to actually know what the budget is going to be this year. And so councils are actually, so where you have a council that is going to consult, they do have to produce a draft annual plan. and you can get that. Basically, councils are required to make that available. So there'll be the generic consultation document at an overview level, and you can only get the actual draft annual plan and budget if you go to the council website and download that. And if you want a printed copy, you'll have to print it off yourself, because when you go to the council and ask for it, they'll say things like, oh, we have to get approval from the communications team to give you that. And they'll say, that's because it's too expensive to keep printing out lots of copies of the draft annual plan.
So what you'll probably find too, everybody as well, is depending on where you are and what councils, that consultation document, some councils will actually put out like in a letterbox drop, for example. So I know in Napier that that's what they do. We'll get this nice, pretty sort of pamphlet-y type newsletter type flyer thing that comes out every year, which is lots of pretty pictures, and it's more like a sales brochure than anything
Yeah.
else. That's your top overview. But when you go in to try and find that annual plan to download on the council website, Kathryn, is it plain as the nose on the face, or do they like to hide
No,
it?
because no. I mean, there's two things with that. One is because the council's websites are hard to navigate. They're all different. They feature documents under heading categories that you wouldn't expect. Like, for example, if you go to publications, you don't necessarily find it there. So you really have to push and, be prepared to spend some time to find it. And when you do find it, unfortunately, if you're wanting to get into the financials, and most people are wanting to look at things like staffing levels, for example, because they know staffing levels are going up hugely. But even if you look at the full draft annual plan, it won't necessarily help you with that, because the categories are confusing. Um, it'll tell you the staffing costs by activities, but those categories don't necessarily conform to the management structures. So you can't actually find out, how many staff in the X um, group management division doing what. So even if you look at the full draft annual plan, it's not necessarily going to help you. And what is necessary then, and this is a problem now because of the time frame, you have to ask OIAs to get that kind of more detailed answers to questions. But I'm going to talk about the annual report where you can get some of this information to help.
Yeah, so what are these annual reports? Because you've referred you in the notes that you've sent to me, you call them the little secret, and there are ways to sort of
Mm.
find the truth. So what are some of those things that you can find in that annual report?
Well, the annual reports give you two things, looking at the annual plan, whether it's the consultation document or the more detailed draft of the annual plan. The annual reports give you some categories of information that you don't get in the plans. And that's really important to know. So one is you get more breakdown of the financials, particularly if you want to know about staffing levels. And again, you don't get it in the annual reports either, in a way that you can look at it and say, oh, there's X number of staff in this um, management division, and they're doing these activities, because again, the categories don't help you do that. But you can see all sorts of things like how much the chief executive is being paid. And they give you the staffing numbers, and you can see the numbers of staff in broad remuneration bands. So you can see how many staff they've got, at X level of remuneration. And then you can if you try and relate that to the activities, if you spend enough time, you can get more of a picture. So that's useful. Second thing that's useful is the annual reports report on performance. Now, this is a wonderful little secret to help you hold your council to account. So if you go into your council's website now and you find the annual report for the 25 So it would be the latest would be the 24-25 annual report. And it's always, quite a long way behind because they have to go through an audit process. So it's only published when they've gone through that audit process. So the end of the financial year is June, but you won't see the annual report for that completed financial year until about September, October, once they've gone through the audit process. But it is very useful background to help you see how well your council is actually performing. And you'll be surprised because it will tell you against the activities whether council met their performance measures or they didn't. And I've gone through these reports and you find everything from zero achievement one year, 30%, 50%. I mean, any organisation that's less than performing at an achievement level of less than 50% of their
So, what
performance
defines
target.
achievement? Achievement against executing what they have in the annual plan?
Yes, they have, there are a number of performance measures that are set out, right? And so then they monitor achievement against that and they have to report on it. So in Kapiti, for example, we had one year where the governance group or function recorded a 0% achievement because they didn't achieve any of their performance measures. And so you can see the figures that you'll get as an overall target. So, and we've had like some councils, less than 80% achievement overall. And that means that some of the group activities will be recording achievement like 33% of their targets met or whatever. So that's very useful information. So
Davina just said there's zero achievement. Crikey, that's insane. And
yep.
and I mean, let's think about that just for a second. If this was any other business with shareholders or stakeholders, and let's face it, we as residents and especially if we're ratepayers, we're the stakeholders in this.
Yeah.
If this were anywhere else, you wouldn't be putting up with that, would you?
No. Some of the results are pretty abysmal, but it's a really good thing to be aware of when you're going to your council and looking at the annual plan and they're proposing to spend X, and well, they only achieved 50% of their targets last year. What are they actually doing? So it is a useful little secret to know about. So you get from the annual report, you'll get a lot more information about operating costs, capital expenditure, and you'll get all the financial stuff about assets and liabilities and what have you. But and there's a bit more detail on council activities. And here's another little secret. During the course of the year, the council also produces performance reports within the year at various times. So there might be a 3-month one or a 6-month one or whatever. Now, if you look at those ones, you'll see a lot more information on the breakdown of activities that you don't get in the annual report or in the annual plan. And you'll be able to look at things like, oh, the council gave this organisation 300,000 to do a feasibility assessment on Papakainga housing or, whatever it is. So it's useful to keep looking at those reports through the course of the year anyway.
Yeah,
Council,
no, we've got
yeah.
sorry, Kathryn, we've got some really great things from chat that I just want to address before we move on.
Mm.
Firstly, Elaine says, I remember looking at a report several years ago about the performance of the animal control unit because she is involved with dog welfare, and they didn't even have a performance target at all. And Shirley Ann is asking, who is monitoring these performance measures? Do they just mark their own homework? Is there someone externally that is holding to them to account? Who watches the watchers, Kathryn?
That is a fantastic question because the answer is really, again, nobody except you. Because what happens, and I mean, they do have to go through an audit process, and that audit process is just about verifying compliance. So the audit that's done is really only about, is it actually validated that they've achieved 100% performance or 75 or whatever. But it's like a compliance audit rather than a performance audit as such. So basically, the only people who are actually really monitoring council performance are you.
Mm. Another great question from Jeanette is where is the money going if they've not achieved their goals? Because I'm sure that that has been funded for in the annual plan. So where does that money go?
Well, they've spent their budget, but they haven't achieved what they were meant to achieve with it. So, and for instance, the council that I mentioned earlier, which shall remain nameless, that has actually overridden their own criteria for whether they have to consult or not. They it's just that so much is actually hidden.
Mm.
So, it's really difficult for people to monitor these things. And of course, they have to put some comment, some explanation about why they've not achieved the performance, but usually it's fairly fudged.
Yeah. Sharon's also asked here too, councils borrow against our properties, hence the high property valuations. The more value, the more they can borrow. Is she correct in that assumption?
Yes.
Well, isn't that great news for all of us that own property? Oh dear. Oh gosh, we've got to set we've set the cat amongst the pigeons in the chat now. Everyone is. I'll just have a quick look, scan down the chat before we jump to our next topic. Oh no, you guys are all having a great old chat amongst yourselves as well. So thank you. Brilliant chat. Okay, so is there anything in terms of little secrets, any other things that people should look out for before we move on to participation and how people can get involved? Because I think after these last few questions, finding out what's not being achieved or figuring out whether they are achieving and who is actually holding them to account, I think is something we certainly want to get involved with.
Yeah. So two comments about that. And we'll get into the how you can get involved in a moment. But a couple of warnings I want to give people is
Mm.
that um, first of all, councils do not make transparent the difference between the core services that they're mandated to deliver and what they're spending on that, and discretionary activities that they are choosing to do and what they're spending on those. And it's really important for people to know that difference because most of us want to know that, the council is delivering on the core services. But a lot of the discretionary activities that councils have undertaken in the last few years are discretionary, and a lot of them are connected to the wellbeing clauses, which have been removed from the Act, which I spoke about before. Not that legislation has actually gone through yet, but it will certainly before the end of this financial year for councils. So we need to start pushing councils to actually be transparent about what are the discretionary activities versus the things that they really have to do as core services. The other thing to watch out for when you do engage, and I'm going to go through the opportunities for engagement, is that um, councils are are very good at resisting efforts from the community to reduce their expenditures and also to not apply these escalating rates increases that we're getting every year. And they'll say things like, oh, well, we can't avoid it because central government is imposing all these extra functions on us. And then they'll say, oh, well, if we don't put these rates increases through, then we'll have to cut back on service levels for core activities. And then what they will do, and some people may have seen this already if they've gone to any of the council briefings. And there was people in Wellington might remember the famous media coverage about the Begonia House. Well, this is a famous and well-used trick that councils use. So if they're feeling forced, that the public is putting pressure on them to not, to not do the rates increase of 10% or whatever, and to cut back on expenditure, they will choose things that they know the community loves, like libraries or maintaining parks, or, in this case, it was the Begonia House, which is such a sort of heritage thing in Wellington. And they'll say those things have to be cut. And so see what the tactic is here. It's the
Mm.
same tactic we've seen with COVID, we've seen with all sorts of other things. They make people afraid so that the people will then go on and say, oh, well, all right, we can't change it. So these are the things to watch out for. But let's talk about how people
Now,
can
Bob's
get it
actually,
done.
yeah, so Bob's actually got a question with that. He said, how the actual bleep, I won't actually fill that word in for you, Bob, but I think I know where you're going. How the actual bleep can they threaten to hold core services due to not having money for vanity projects?
That's a jolly good question. And basically, look, I can tell you that uh, advisors like engineers had been telling Wellington City Council 20 years ago, and I can remember discussing this with an engineer who was doing a survey and review of all the pipes and the underground infrastructure. And at that time, he was warning the council that if they didn't properly maintain, upgrade, and repair the aging infrastructure, that in 20 years there would be disaster. And so councils have spent the money on vanity projects instead, and not done the discipline of actually looking after the infrastructure. And this is why it happens, because those things like stadiums and, other fancy projects, which are usually put in place because some mayor or councillor wants, their name on a monument. um, councillors make the choice to spend these things, and the community is partly to blame because these things are popular. So we need to learn to tell the councils that first and foremost, you look after the maintenance on core infrastructure so you can deliver core services.
Mm. Now, one last question before we move on to participation. What are the implications? This is from Rachel. What are the implications for homeowners of council borrowing against our properties and rates income? They're firing out the good questions tonight, Kathryn.
The result is increased debt, which the council will then put up your rates to cover.
Mm. So it's a circular, a
Yeah,
vicious financial circular cycle.
yeah.
So then how do people get more involved?
Let me just finish the answer on that previous one, because again, this is getting into financial management stuff. But the debt repayment issue, and understanding the strategies that different councils are adopting for repaying debt is quite important. So, for example, in Kapiti, we have a council which is uh, applying quite a rigorous debt repayment strategy where they're trying to impose as much as possible on the current ratepayers rather than sort of spreading it more evenly. So you have to look at the debt repayment strategies as well that councils are doing to make sure that it's fair in terms of the intergenerational costs and who's paying when.
Mm. there's just so much to do. Right, so let's talk about participation. You mentioned that before, about people getting involved. A lot of people in here are already involved, but they do need to know more. So how is it
Yeah.
for anyone, a lay person in the public, to actually get a sort of a finger on the pulse, or a little bit of a nudge and a niggle into council to get information that they need, or be able to submit their feedback into what is going on?
Yeah. Okay. So if we're talking about the annual plan process specifically, and I'll talk about that first. So here are the steps. First thing, try and get informed. Try and look at some documents. Um, Try and get a handle on what's going on before you actually start engaging, because the more informed you are, the less easy it is for council staff or councillors to deflect what you're trying to ask. So that's the first thing. Get informed, and I would suggest that people um, look at the consultation document, but understand that that's only going to give you the overview. Look at the the full draft annual plan, and don't worry about the fact that you're not going to understand most of it. It's just a reality. Even I look at these documents and think, what the heck is that? Um, so, but try and get more of an overview, and then have a look at the annual report for the most recent year. See if you can extract any interesting little tidbits from that about council staffing, council remuneration levels, um, about non-performance of particular areas. So do that first. Then the council will run all sorts of engagement sessions, and where you can pop along and you'll encounter some of the councillors there, or some of the staff, or sometimes even the contractors that they engage in, and you can ask questions. So those pop-up or pop-in sessions are quite useful. Then you can attend the council annual plan briefings, and notice that some of these briefings, and there's a nice little distinction which the council will introduce to you, which is the difference between a public meeting or a meeting in public. And so a meeting in public is where they're going to have a briefing. The staff are going to brief the councillors, and the annual plan briefings are like this. So, the whole process has involved a lot of internal stuff with public excluded meetings. Then they get to these annual plan briefings. So the meetings in public are ones where you can go along and observe, but you can't speak and you can't ask anything. And then the public meetings are when you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. But unfortunately, the way that things are structured is that that stage is mostly right at the end of the process, where people have done their submissions, they've asked for a speaking slot, and they only get to speak at that time. So what you can also do is organise your own meetings about the annual plan. And just try and, advertise to people some of the things that you're concerned about. Try and, you can hire a venue without a lot of cost if you can get a few people involved. And run your own public meetings, and then find out what people are saying and what they're concerned about. And then you can take that back to council. While the annual plan process is going on, you don't have to be confined to the process that the council actually sets up for your engagement, because that's quite restricted. So you can still approach your ward councillor to ask about things in the annual plan that you're not sure about. You can write to the mayor, you can write to councillors, and you can still do OIAs, because, an OIA is a 20-day working span. So it gives the council 20 working days to respond. So we're running out of time for OIAs.
So I'm glad you brought that up about those ward councillors, because they are theoretically the people that are supposed to represent you
Yeah,
in your neighbourhood. So, and most of these
absolutely.
ward councillors have Facebook profiles.
Yeah,
So you can get hold of them on Facebook, send them an email, make a time to have an appointment to speak with them, because theoretically they're supposed to be standing up for you, are they not?
absolutely. And that's their job, to represent you. It isn't to go and, get comfortable sitting in the nice council offices and, having a lovely workshop with the council staff and having a nice lunch and then, rubber stamping what the council what the staff put up. So, make your ward councillors actually do their job. That's
I'm
what
just
they're
going to put
there.
a I'm just going to pop a screen. Hopefully you can see this on the screen.
So, the end of the process from the council's perspective is that the public will make submissions and you can request a speaking time and go along and speak to your submission. It probably won't change anything much because by the time the council's got to that stage, they're pretty much entrenched in what they're going to do. But still, you can keep applying pressure through the annual plan process. So then if we go to the next slide, and when I say, make sure that your ward councillor is actually doing what they're there to do, this is the time of the year where councillors should be most active in engaging with the community. So make them do that. It's their job. It's what they're getting paid as councillors to do. So what I'm suggesting here is that through this next annual plan process, so we've got basically March, April, 2 months. So in this next few weeks, one of the things that would be really helpful for what we can do together, and remember that all your feedback, we are looking at, and we can help by building things which we might do OIAs on ourselves, and which we can certainly use to push back on local government in New Zealand and also with the minister. These are all avenues which your feedback really is helpful for us to do. So if you do these two things and get your feedback into us, firstly, find out what the planned rates increase is for your district and write in and tell us that. And see if you can access the annual report that I was talking about and write to us about anything interesting that you find in there, like the sort of performance achievement stuff that I was talking about before. That would be great if people could write in about those things. So let's go on. So this is for not only for the annual plan stage, but also beyond. So it's generally how can people push back on councils? And more people are asking this question. Well, what can we actually do? So let's go through these things. Firstly, find out more information. I'm sorry there's no substitute for that, but there isn't. Find ways to write, and you can write to the mayor, or you can make an Information Act request. Find out, make your council identify what are the discretionary activities that they're undertaking as opposed to the core services, and ask what that cost is that they're spending on discretionary activities as opposed to core services. So you can ask to meet with your ward councillor and ask these questions. And if they don't know, get them to find out from the staff. You can write to your council, you can write to the mayor at any time, any of the councillors. And if you're getting really exercised about things, you can write letters of protest to the local government minister. And there are some things happening with councils at the moment where the current government is trying to direct councils to do things like keep the rates increases down. They should be taking into account that the well-being clauses are being removed. All these things. And you can do, for local government, it's called Lagoima requests. So officially, local government, official information and meeting act requests to get more information. And when you do these, you have to be as specific as possible with your questions. Because if you ask general questions, you'll get general responses back. You can set up and organize your own meetings. And so, I've talked many times about getting a group around you. If you already have a concerned ratepayers group in your area, that's a useful vehicle. But you can do this from your local VFF group. You can, organize a few people who are going to take an interest in what the councils are doing. So you can organise your own public meetings. You can organise protests outside the council offices. And one thing that Maree and I were talking about a week or so ago is, and that, again, this is something you can do from your VFF group, get a few people who actually will go along and sit in on council meetings. And if you do that, you're doing two things. One is you're going to get more informed about what the council is doing. And secondly, you're putting pressure on the council just by being there. The fact that, the public are coming in and they're watching and they're observing what the council is doing. So try and get some of those local group activities going.
Right. That is some great advice. And actually, and I love the fact that we called it the knitting circles. If you are here and someone may be here in the chat from Nelson, the Tasman, that's what they do down there. There's a group of ladies, about six or eight, and a few chaps that come along as well. They all take turns. At least two or three of them go along to every single meeting, and they just happen to knit. And it's just that
Yeah,
eyeballing. We see you.
yeah, fantastic. And it lets the councillors know that the public are watching.
Yeah. Yeah, so important. The chat has been going absolutely ballistic
No.
since we've been doing this. So I'm just going to jump in. Oh, who's the local government minister? Kathryn, there's a nice easy one.
Simon Watts.
Simon Watts, there you go. So yeah, definitely talk to them. And I actually think a little bit of quiet protest outside council buildings is not necessarily a bad idea at all. That
No.
definitely sends a very, very clear message, particularly if you're looking at certain topics and items. Now, everybody, just to remind you, because I'm just very acutely aware of the time, all of your questions here in the chat, we will actually take. And Kathryn does analyse this. This is so incredibly important. And remember, if you want to email anything in, inbox@rcr.media is the place to do it. So as we said, now finally, let's look at some of the, you've talked about the homework that they can look at the moment. Looking forward, now we're going to have a look and analyse some of that from this week, from those annual plans. And one of the things that I think is going to crop up with these annual plans is looking at some of the mitigations around hazards and risks and managed retreat. That's going to be the topic of our next webinar. Why do you think that is going to be so important for our discussions for everybody moving forward?
Well, it's a really hot topic, and people are becoming aware that there are significant threats that are coming at us. And it's also a national issue because this is happening all over the country. And it's interesting to me that when we talk about managed retreat, I can't see a big thing about that internationally. And I think about this often when I'm just looking at my screensaver and I'm seeing pictures of all these places through Europe and America where there's buildings right down to the shoreline. Where are their plans for moving Manhattan because of sea level rise? Where are all those historic buildings in Europe? What's the plan for where they're going to go? So for some reason, this is happening in New Zealand, and it's not only because of what people will tell you about our unpredictable weather. So this is going to be our hot topic for next time. And um, I've just suggested that one of the things that you might do in preparation for that is write to your mayor or do a Lagoima request or ask your ward councillor to find out how many properties in your district have been identified as having flood, as being in flood risk areas. Um, and therefore, things will be going on their limb documentation without you knowing. So
Mm.
see if you can find out how many properties have those kind of flood risk area designations um, in your council area.
Yeah, I see the hot topic, obviously, apparently on TV yesterday. Amberley Beach was featured. Honestly, it almost feels like every week there's a new community which has been flagged for potential managed retreat. Right, but thank you everybody for submitting some stuff. And there was some really, just quickly very, very quickly, before I tell you about what's happening next week, there was one last question there was a bit of concern around that if there is council borrowing against the value of our properties, which would then increases the rates. So then we end up having to pay for the rates with that lending. What happens then if the rates become so high that homeowners can't afford the rates? Do they run the risk of losing their properties by council for having unpaid rates?
Yes, there's no
You're a
other
ray of
way.
sunshine tonight, Kathryn.
I'm, I'm sorry to be. Um, I mean, I should say we did discover through the feedback that there are some councils that are doing good things and
Mm,
increasing opportunities for community engagement and various other things. So it's not all bad.
mm,
And I hope that, some of you at least sitting in areas where your council is doing some things right. But this is a real threat. And I think, we don't have to be afraid because we've got ways of pushing back about all this stuff. And I think also of exposing some of the agendas that are being driven with this stuff. But
mm.
there are serious threats here, and we need to be aware of it and we need to be on it.
Yeah. Hey, look, again, thank you to everyone who has put some fantastic questions in the chat tonight. As I said, we're going to go through all of those. We're going to summarize it. And what we'll do is we'll take those summaries and address them again at the beginning of next month's show. So you'll be able to see and hear back on what we're going to do with that. Next week, actually, we're going to be changing it up a little bit. I've got Aaron McLaughlin joining me. Now, Aaron is a life coach. Many of you who are in Canterbury know Aaron. He's also a VFF regional coordinator down there. And we're going to have a really practical conversation around our internet use, doom scrolling, our mental health, and our relationship with the internet, and actually how this will impact our everyday lives. If you've ever found that you've just been held hostage by this little guy here, we're going to talk about some really practical ways that you can actually release and free yourself from that and actually help get your old noodle back into a better place. I think that's a really timely conversation for things right now. So do look out for the sign up for that if you want to register for that really fantastic Wednesday webinar, Lifestyle Edition with Aaron McLaughlin. That is next Wednesday, 1st of April. And it's not an April Fool's joke, I promise you. And that is at 8 p.m. Kathryn, as always, it has been an utter joy. We've actually covered a tremendous amount of ground tonight. Thank you again. Any final thoughts before we sign off for the night?
Um, just that everybody who is listening and putting stuff in the chat, You give me hope. You really do. You're fantastic. And I'm just thrilled at how onto it people are, how aware, how insightful. You guys are just great. So please keep it coming.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you again. This has been Kathryn Ennis-Carter here for our very special Council Watch. We've got another one coming up in another month, so do watch out for that. And don't forget your homework, because remember, this only works when you participate. And hopefully we've given you some of the tools for participation. Have a great evening, everybody. I'll see you again very, very soon. Thank you, Kathryn. Take care.
Okay. Good night, everybody.